This is In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm your host, Jay Daniels. This week we explore the intersection of faith, family, and music, as shared by saxophonist and composer Jimmy Greene. His latest album is called While Looking Up, and it features a song penned in honor of his daughter Anna. You'll hear some of her story, along with the beginnings of Jimmy's musical career. We start off by talking about Jimmy's primary instrument, the saxophone.
Well, my dad is responsible for that in a way because he got me my first instrument when I was really young. He actually played a little saxophone when he was in school, when he was in junior high and high school. He grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and so I grew up in Connecticut. And when I was 6, he would bring out his instrument every now and again and play it. And he wasn't a great saxophonist, but he could still play a couple tunes. And he was actually much more into songwriting and arranging at that point, and had written and arranged and produced a handful of R&B singles in the early 70s, self-produced. So he was very much into music, but like I said, he wasn't a great saxophonist, but he did have a tenor, and he would bring it out and play it every now and again. And I just loved the sound of it. I loved the shape of it. I loved the way it looked. And I kept begging him for one of my own. So when I was 6, he bought me an alto. And that was the beginning of me in the saxophone. So he basically showed me how to put it together and make a sound. And I played it in my elementary school, which is very rare these days for an elementary school to have an instrumental music program. I mean, I remember playing in my elementary school band, playing alto saxophone in the band at age 6. This was in East Hartford, Connecticut. So I was very fortunate to have that experience, and then I played it all throughout elementary and middle school. And by the time I got to right before the time I got to high school, I really started falling in love with the instrument and with jazz music. My dad had a couple of jazz recordings in his studies of songwriting and arranging, and I just devoured those. And he bought me some more. Him growing up in Alabama at the time, he wasn't a big jazz fan per se, but he was growing up in the black community and listening to the radio. He was aware of all the great saxophone players. So he knew about Sonny Rollins and Dexter Gordon and Charlie Parker and John Coltrane and Lester Young and so on and so forth, Coleman Hawkins. So he bought me pretty much a record of each of theirs, and he bought me some Branford Marsalis records because at the time, this was 1989, 1990. He was the young lion, so to speak. So my dad helped out quite a bit with getting me going, and my grandparents, my mom's parents, happened to be big jazz fans. They were born in the mid-20s, so they grew up and were teenagers and were young people in the big band era. So they loved the big bands and dancing, and so there's always a lot of music going around. So I grew up in a household where music was a big part of it, and I'm very appreciative of that. So that's how I became interested in the instrument, and I think what solidified my desire and to be a professional musician, to do this for my living was what solidified it. I had thoughts of it and dreams of it, but what actually gave me a path saying, no, this is possible and this is the way to go, was meeting Jackie McLean when I was 15 years old. A teacher of mine at my high school, Bloomfield High School in Bloomfield, Connecticut, her name is Yvonne Rodandi, set up a meeting with me and Mr. McLean at his performing arts community school called Artist Collective, which was in Hartford, I don't know, maybe 5-8 miles away. And I didn't know Mr. McLean at the time, and Mr. Rodandi gave me a recording of his, and I couldn't believe that such a great musician lived so close to me. I had no idea. So she set up a meeting, and from that moment, when I first heard him play and was received so warmly by him, that made firm in my mind, this is what I want to do for my life. So in a nutshell, that's my relationship with saxophone.
It's been an ongoing relationship for many years, too. Out of curiosity, do you play any other reed instruments outside of the saxophone?
Well, saxophonists are, once you get to a certain level and you have eyes of doing it at a professional level, then you're always encouraged to what's called double, which means play clarinet and flute. And some other saxophone players even go further and pick up oboe or bassoon or other woodwind instruments. But mainly the ones that are kind of expected are clarinet and flute. Now, I can tell you that I dove headfirst into flute when I was in high school and really fell in love with that instrument and studied and was helped along quite a bit when I was in college by the flute professor at the Hart School where I attended, named Janet Arms. I always ran from the clarinet, though. And thankfully, in my career, it hasn't been a huge hindrance. I haven't lost out on many gigs because I didn't play clarinet. But I would have been much more secure in the gigs I did have if I played clarinet better, because I was kind of hiding. Whenever there was a clarinet part, I'd kind of play as quietly as possible because I didn't really feel very confident in my playing. It just got to be within the last couple of years that I felt more comfortable on instruments. So if there are any young, aspiring professional saxophones out there, don't be afraid of the clarinet and the flute. Just take it little by little every day.
As you have been taught by so many wonderful mentors over the years, if it's my understanding, obviously, because we share the music through our performances, naturally we are educators in that sense. But you still provide lessons. You still offer teaching in an academic sense, right?
Yeah, I do. I'm a professor of music and a co-coordinator of the Jazz Studies program at Western Connecticut State University in Danbury, Connecticut. I find a lot of satisfaction. It's very rewarding to teach this music, especially the music that is known as jazz, because it's a communal music that is developed by sharing and by passing it on, so to speak. So it makes me really feel like I'm doing my part to be involved in education. And I was inspired by so many great musicians who were great musicians first and then great communicators, like Jackie McLean and Dave Santoro is another gentleman I studied with. And on further into my professional career, I got graduate degrees and studied with folks like Jim McNeely and Justin Chocho, Phil Markowitz. So I really feel like it's incumbent upon musicians who do this for a living to inspire and to help along the next generation, because I know that I benefited so much from the wealth of knowledge and experience of my mentors.
Thinking about the saxophone itself, how are you able to express yourself through the saxophone?
That's a good question. I often tell students it's like learning how to speak a language. Whatever you grew up learning to speak in your household where you grew up, that's usually going to be the most comfortable environment to learn in. When you're very young, like you learn, and you're not aware that you're learning when you are learning. But if you're around a language all the time, you learn to speak it. I don't remember the first words I learned how to speak. I don't remember the process of learning those words, but I remember at some point I was able to communicate, and your communication gets more in depth and more sophisticated the longer you're immersed in that language. You could also look at if you go to another country, for example. I studied Spanish throughout my schooling, right? Throughout junior high school and high school, I studied Spanish, and even into college. But I never felt as comfortable conversing in Spanish or, being around and being comfortable expressing myself in Spanish as when, my wife is from Puerto Rico. So going and spending time with her family there and speaking mostly in Spanish, even though everybody, there is fluent English as well. But the main language is Spanish. So being immersed in it, you get better, you get, you feel more comfortable, you feel more expressive. It's the same with music. And we're talking about the music we call jazz. The first way that I fell in love with the music wasn't analyzing it or reading about it. It was hearing it. It was listening and just falling in love with the sound of it and wanting to listen more and more and more and listen to more saxophonists and more musicians. And then you emulate what you hear. And at first you get frustrated because you can't make your saxophone sound like, I couldn't make my horn sound like Lester Young's horn or Charlie Parker's horn. But the more you immerse yourself in the language, the more you start to understand. So how do I express myself personally? And I often tell students the process of becoming a great improviser with your own voice is a lot of it is not a conscious decision, right? It's immersing yourself in a language and understanding that you as a person and me as a person, I'm talking about myself, are an individual. There was one of you that was ever made, and there's only going to be one of you that is ever made. No one else. You are not capable of playing the saxophone like John Coltrane. It's not possible because you're not him. There was only one him. There was only one him with his unique background, with his unique ears, with his unique gift, with his unique, the way his oral cavity and his lungs and his body resonated. There's only one. So you can't sound like him. You can sound like you, though, with the benefit of all of his information. And that's the goal, right? Is to, like we don't necessarily envision ourselves speaking like our parents or our caregivers or whoever raises us. But we speak with the same, hopefully we learn to speak with the same and maybe even more information than they had. So it's the same process. So I feel like all the musicians that I ever listened to and all the music that I ever kind of devoured, that's all a part of me. But, there's a certain lens through which I see it. There's a certain filter through which I've accepted some of these things and not other things that makes me who I am. So, I am me because I am a unique person, not because I've decided I'm not going to sound like this one or I am going to sound like that one. I think it's more of an organic process than that.
There's one other key element, and I've really been looking forward to talking with you about this. Not only your music, but your life are continually guided by your Christian faith, and I'd like to hear more of that story if I can. Was your faith something that was, for lack of a better term, imparted to you during your childhood, or was it something that you found on your own later in life?
There's a scripture, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is older, he won't depart from it. I'm probably butchering the exact way it's written, but that's the gist of it, right? My mom is a born-again Christian, and I was raised in the church from a young age, and I really feel that on one hand, I was very fortunate to be raised in the church and raised, knowing about God and learning about Jesus and learning about how, he died for our sins and that, we can live this life of freedom in a way because of that, and a life of hope, a life knowing that what we see here on earth isn't the end. That we have a life in eternity as believers. So, on the one hand, I'm so grateful I was raised in that, On the other hand, I'm grateful that my mom didn't, when I became kind of a teenager and wanted to do my own things, she didn't bash me over the head with the Bible, and she didn't, stick her finger in my face and admonish me for this or that, but just loved me, and would give me something to read once in a blue moon that she felt, I think at this stage, Jimmy, you should think about this, and I appreciated that because what we're called to do, and what Jesus says in Scripture are the two greatest commandments are love God and serve only God and love your neighbor as yourself. So, all the other rules and all the regulations that we humans feel like we need to live a quote unquote godly life, we make it more complex than it really is. So I'm grateful that my mom was loving, even though I was doing some things that I shouldn't have been doing. She was loving and provided a really good kind of model for loving kids and teaching them well, but allowing them in a lot of ways to figure it out on their own. So when I was probably about 24 years old. So you spin it forward. I'm living in New York. I'm a professional musician full time. Mind you, I wasn't, living as recklessly as I could have. I credit that to my Christian faith. I credit that to a lot of ways that I saw people around me were living, and I didn't want to go that direction. So anyway, as a young person, you're presented with all kind of different options of how to live your life, and you choose which way to go based on a lot of factors. And I'm just thankful that I look back now at that time, 20, 25 years ago, and see that God always had me in his hand, So when I rededicated my life to him, to serving God, I realized that, a lot of those teachings that I learned when I was a little boy, had kind of remained a focus of my life, even though, I was doing a whole lot of things and wasn't concentrating on my walk with God, that he never left me, and that he was always there. So, as a parent now, I am imparting the same sort of love, the same sort of care as my mom did for me when I was young. And hopefully now that spins forward in the future.
Your latest album is called While Looking Up, and I love the inspiration from where you drew that title. The title, While Looking Up, as I read on your website, was inspired by the words of your pastor. And they said, if I'm not able to find strength or peace by looking inward, or if I'm not able to do it by looking outward to my immediate surroundings, I have to look upward. And there is one particular track, April 4th, that was written in tribute to your daughter, Anna. And a number of years ago, she was lost tragically in 2012. We talk about this intersection of family, faith, and music in your case. In what way, at that time and during the years since, how was your faith made real because of that?
My daughter being taken from us, that is something that I hope, no one ever has to experience. Although sadly in our country, people experience this every day through gun violence, through police brutality. Sons and daughters are being taken from parents every day. What I know of God is that he doesn't promise that our lives are going to be, once we commit to our belief and our walk with him, he doesn't promise that our lives are going to be free from strife, free from pain. In fact, the scriptures, Jesus says in scripture, in this life you will have trouble. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. That, in a nutshell, is the only reason my faith in God, and knowing that Jesus overcoming death and the grave meant that my little girl would be with him, and that we would see her again one day. Sometimes you say, why me, Lord? Why me? And then you realize, well, I'm human, and this is what we live with here on earth. So why not me? Why there's nothing that says that I will be spared of pain and suffering because I'm a Christian. What it does mean, though, is that I know that God will sustain me through it, and that's His promise. So, and I have to testify that He is faithful in that. He has sustained us, and it's an ongoing process. It's been 8 years, but it's not any less painful now than it was 8 years ago. It's just that we have learned day by day to trust Him and know that He will continue to see us through. And that pain that was raw and overwhelming at times in late 2012, early 2013, it hasn't lessened. It just has become more familiar. So to understanding, the feelings, understanding the pain, understanding the triggers, more so than I was able to in those first few hours, days, weeks. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and that's what it has been. I fear no evil, for thou art with me. That 23rd Psalm is another big one for me. It's like the Good Shepherd. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm living it. This is what it means. I rely on my trust in Jesus every day, and He has been faithful.
And you mentioned the grief never ends, and I have lost a number of loved ones. I've not lost a child as you have. And it hit me the hardest last year. It was my uncle who passed away, but we were more like brothers, if anything. And not a day goes by I don't think about him, But in your case, in thinking about how it has challenged and grown your faith and affected your life, how have you channeled that grief and the remembrance of your daughter through your own music?
That's one of the questions that's hardest to answer. It's hard to quantify because the goal of any artist is to reflect where they are as a human, at that particular point, and to be as honest and as clear as possible. Clarity and honesty are two things that we always strive for. So I feel like as far as channeling my grief, I don't know if I do that so much, or I'm not aware of the actual process of channeling grief. I know that there's a lot of songs that I've written that I've done through tears, but it wasn't in an effort to channel grief. It was more in an effort to, my daughter was 6.5 when she was murdered in her classroom at St. Luke's School. Her life was just beginning, and I felt like she had so much to offer the world. She was an amazing little human, and I felt a responsibility and a burden to let people know more about her, and so that her memory could live on, even though she's not here in the flesh, that something in her name carries on. To me and to my wife, that was very, very important, and it still is very important. There's a lot that we've done along those lines. As far as music is concerned, I wanted to just remember my little girl and to express where I was at as a human being in those days and months and years after she was taken from us. And also just kind of, in whatever way I could, just let others know just how amazing of a gift that she was and is.
Looking at your latest album, I want to take what we've talked about today and look at the impact that might have upon those who come across your music. The album is filled with a number of originals, including the tribute to Anna, April 4th, along with several other compositions of yours. And it begins with So in Love by Cole Porter, a flamenco sort of interpretation. And then it ends, which, my goodness, I wish my prayers were always as lovely as listening to Simple Prayer by you on track 10. When people listen to your album, when people listen to your music, from today and yesterday. How do you hope that your expression of life and faith through your music will touch others?
I hope that people enjoy it. There's so much in our world today to be upset about, to be angry about, to be frustrated with. There's so much that needs to change. There's so much that needs to be shifted in our world. In the midst of it, though, we all need some time or some mental break in order that we might return to our efforts, more vigorously. So, something beautiful to enjoy, I feel personally is a great gift to people. Hopefully, people get a lot of enjoyment out of listening to what I do. John Coltrane, to me, is a very special case of what is possible to do with music. It's people who knew him speak about him. They say that he would practice, incessantly, 12, 14, 16 hours in a day. He would play concerts in clubs, play 7 sets in a night. As the club policy was, they played 6, 7 short sets, 40-minute sets. And that's a long time. That's, 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. or something like that. And in between sets, he would go in the back of the place and practice more. So it was clear that it was more than just some desire, some selfish desire to be the best or to be the greatest. And I remember reading a quote of his saying that, and it kind of explained why he felt so driven to be the best possible musician he could possibly be. And he said, and I'm butchering the quote, but the essence of it is, I want to develop myself to the utmost of my capabilities, to try to inspire humanity to do the same, to inspire others to develop themselves and to be the best versions of themselves, to basically uplift humanity by his example. And I'm like, wow, that is a pretty selfless way to look at, this pursuit of excellence. That's, it's not for me. It's not so I can make a ton of money and everybody kind of bow down to me because I'm the greatest. It's because, I want to work so hard and I want to develop myself to such a degree that it inspires others to do the same.
One final thought to summarize everything we've talked about today. Why music?
Music isn't so much of a vocation. It is, obviously, but it's a way that humans relate to one another. It's a unique way of connection and communication, apart from words, apart from everything else that crisscrosses the globe. You can not speak a word of someone's culture, but can be totally immersed in the music that comes from it. Obviously, your appreciation of the music, broadens and deepens the more you learn about the actual culture, but the music is often an entree. It often breaks the ice for people and communities and cultures, because it's something that I've never run into somebody. Maybe there are these people, but I've never run into somebody that says, I really don't like music at all. I think it's being human, and it's part of us that is open and open to others in more ways than many parts of us are. So for me, that's why music is so powerful, and why I feel so blessed and just so thankful that I'm able to do it every day.
Jimmy Greene, a dear friend and our guest during this week's In Studio from Simply Timeless. The name of his album is called While Looking Up, and you can find out more information about it by visiting jimmygreene.com. Jimmy, all the best to you and your family in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. Special thanks to you also for taking time to listen this week. Until next time, I'm Jay Daniels. Thanks for listening to In Studio from Simply Timeless.